Hello and welcome this evening. My name is Heather Cummins. I'm the Gallery Programs Coordinator with the Bell Museum, and I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. We're so happy to be hosting this workshop for you, Be a Pest Detective, and we are excited to thank our sponsors, the Farm and Food Alliance of Minnesota and MGK, for their generous support in bringing this virtual program to all of you tonight. Tonight's program focuses on managing our gardens with practices that support insects and plants, crucial members of our environment. And I would like to ground us as we begin by acknowledging that the Bell Museum sits on the traditional lands of the Dakota people. This land, from which I also join you from tonight, was reserved by the Dakota in the 1851 Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, and it remains sacred to them today. I would also like to acknowledge the Anishinaabe or Ojibwe people, indigenous keepers of the land to the north. Dakota and Ojibwe knowledge systems are crucial ways of knowing the land we now call Minnesota. And at the Bell Museum, we honor that knowledge and the values embedded in it, and we support the knowledge keepers who protect it. Our program tonight supports our current temporary exhibit, Bugs Outside the Box, which presents larger than life insect sculptures, each showcasing the hidden beauty in these many beasts of the natural world. Throughout the exhibit, we'd like to invite our audiences to get inspired and get outside. Use your observation skills to get to know insects on our learning landscape and in your own neighborhoods. Activities have been developed in partnership with researchers and students at the University of Minnesota, as well as community partners to help you in your observation adventures. Also would like to remind folks about our upcoming September workshop with Dragon's Wind, where we will explore how to support insects as they build their homes. Our presenter tonight is Sharon O'Connor, and we have Kristen and Jean with us to help with responding to questions in the chat. Sharon, Kristen, and Jean are Ramsey County Master Gardeners, and as Master Gardeners, they educate residents in university research-based eco-friendly gardening to improve physical and environmental health. Ramsey County Master Gardeners work in partnership with the University of Minnesota Extension Master Gardener Program and the Ramsey County Environmental Health. Before I turn it over to Sharon, I have a few notes for our audience. We'll have time throughout our presentation tonight for questions, so please enter those in the chat as you go, and Jean and Kristen will help keep track of them, and we'll have pauses throughout where Sharon will also help to answer those for everyone. And as you've noticed, we have live captioning turned on for our program this evening. And I would like to thank Megan Stum, our captioner. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. If you do not want to see the captions, you can hide them by clicking the live CC button at the bottom of your screen. And with that, Sharon, Christy, and Jean, thank you so much for being here with us tonight, and I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Heather. Happy to be with you. As Heather said, we are all Master Gardeners. I started being a Master Gardener back in 2008. And I have to tell you, I've learned so much since I did that. And so if you're ever thinking about it, don't hesitate to check out the program. I'm going to share my screen here with you. Give me just a minute. And Jean, how are we there?
Not seeing anything yet.
Apologize. Oh, I apologize here. There we go.
We're seeing it now.
Okay. I
You
can
might-
just-
If you want to go into, you could go into presenter view if you'd like.
Yes, I will. The problem I'm having is with my mouse.
Oh,
Okay, okay. Go, go, go. Are you seeing presenter or anything?
we're seeing your presenter view if you, but it's fine.
How about now?
Yeah, that's better.
That's it.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for your patience, and we'll try not to have anything like that happen again. As Heather said, we're part of the University of Minnesota Extension, and we are all volunteers. Our priorities are in a number of areas. This year in particular, we are emphasizing the need for local food. The need is so high. So we're doing a lot of growing and collecting of fresh produce. So let's get started talking about our being a pest detective. The key to this is to use a number of clues in order to figure out what's wrong, instead of just taking a can of something and spraying on it, to really take some time to figure out what's going wrong with your plant, whatever it is. So we'll look at the plant itself, the suspects, the bugs or diseases or whatever, why they might be going after your plant, and how things are around the plant, how the environment works. Now, this poor squash plant is looking pretty grim. And so the first thing is to identify that, and I just did that. I identified it as a squash plant, and it has totally fallen over. If I was looking at this, I would notice that there are other plants around it that look like they are not doing well, and still others that look healthy. And also that the soil looks very dry. So what we would want to do in a situation like this is to do a little research and find out for that plant what kind of problems are common. And as we go along, we'll share with you some tools the university has to help you with that. And as well as what kind of problems this plant typically has, we want to understand what kind of pests and problems there are in your yard, in your garden, and in the area in general. Often, if you're having a problem with something, your neighbors and other people in the area are as well. We'll start out by looking at a history. Was the plant healthy? Did we plant it properly? For instance, we have a tree in this picture, and fairly frequently people will plant trees too deep and not unwind the roots if it's come in a burlap ball or whatever. And trees really need those roots spread out. So that could be the problem with this. We also want to look at whether it's getting enough sun or enough water and what's been happening with it. Did we move it recently? Have we been pruning it? And is it the right time to be doing that? Then we'd also want to look at what's going on nearby. Has there been construction, or have the neighbors had their lawn treated or treated it? And do you have some drift that's coming over to your yard? I dealt with a construction problem a few years back where the street was being dug up. And even though I moved my first couple feet of plants that were by the curb there, that area did not grow very well afterwards. I had to supplement the soil. You also want to take a look at how the weather has been lately. And this has been a really tough year for that. Has it been dry? Has it been hot? Are there drought conditions? Has it been the opposite with too much rain? So you really want to take some time to think about that as well. And next, we say we want to know our suspects. What might that be? Most problems fall into these categories. The first is abiotic, and examples of those are weather, temperature, water, pesticide, nutrition, and compaction. And you may notice with those that they're all non-living chemical and physical factors in the environment, which might affect the ecosystem. Could be an animal. You might want to take a look at what kind of animals are around. Do you have any rodents, woodchucks, deer frequently? And notice sometimes it's people and what they're doing that's causing a problem with your plant. Insects are the next one we're going to take a look at, and it could be any of a whole variety of insects. We see that Asian beetle in the center picture over on the right. And the last one is microbial, which we see on that lower picture. Powdery mildew is probably what that is. And you may be seeing a lot of it this year in your garden because of the high humidity over a long period of time. So why do these different things go after our plants? Well, really, all they're trying to do is live and procreate. They're not out to deliberately make us miserable or kill our plants. They're trying to do what they need to survive. So they're looking for food and water. They need places to hide, and they are trying to avoid predators. And they're also trying to find ideal conditions for raising their young and maintaining the species. So let's take a look at the crime scene. We want to look at where the damage is, kind of how it's been going. So you can see where this is not just a thing where you look at the one day that you happen to notice it. You want to kind of think back. Has it been going from the top down or from the bottom up? Or from the inside out or the outside in? Sometimes, especially with trees, the damage shows up just on one side. And then we also want to take a look at the plant itself. Which parts of the plant are affected? And it may very well not be all of these, especially with a tree. It's often the leaves, but it could also be the branches, the bark. If you think of your tomatoes, they may look pretty good, have blossom and rot on one end. And so different parts of the plant may be affected. And finally, is it just one or are there multiple plants in your garden that are affected by this particular problem? I mentioned the mildew a few minutes ago. This one is, if you have it, it's probably around in multiple plants in the garden. And if similar plants in the garden are having the same problems, that gives you another clue. So let's look at the evidence here. And in this picture, we see leaves that are chewed. We're not seeing little holes poked in the leaves. We're actually seeing big chewing marks. So that is physical evidence of the pest. You might see its body. You might see scat around or spores on the leaves. And the symptoms of that are the results of the pest. So that could be wilting, holes, these chewing marks in the leaf, or the leaf could be changing color or getting spots, or some combination of those. So let's look at a timeline for something that's happening with your plants. If it happens suddenly, if a plant suddenly falls over or suddenly shows a big problem, that's most likely an abiotic cause. And so just a reminder, these are non-living chemical and physical factors. So it could be a weather event, it could be a bad storm, could be pesticide drift from a neighbor's yard. And it could also be grazing animals. That could be a sudden cause. If it's gradual, it's more likely to be a biotic cause. And this is not a hard and fast rule, but it's kind of a usual situation you can look at. Often insects, could be microbial, a bacterial or a viral infection or fungus, or it could have to do with past weather events. So again, it's not hard and fast, but it's a good clue. So now we're at the point where we want to start identifying what's causing the problem. We've collected all this evidence and want to figure out what's going on. So there are questions that you want to ask about it. This is really an important phase of solving the problem, because using the right tools for the wrong problem won't help. Insecticide won't help if the problem is a rabbit. If a plant really needs to be moved because it's not in a good location, then insecticide's not going to help either. So we want to have some idea, having looked at all these other problems, what's changing, when did it start, what parts of the plant are having issues, and is it uniformly distributed across the plant or kind of irregular? Also, what time of the year is it? Is it spring, fall? And then what has the weather been like? Are we in the middle of a heat wave or a drought, for instance? So let's recap what we've talked about so far. We've gone over these kinds of questions in solving the problem. But before we talk about preventing problems, do you have any questions, or is there anything coming up in the chat?
Sharon, we had a question about from Christina, actually. Are there any laws in Minnesota that regulate pesticide spraying lawn companies have to adhere to?
I believe there are. I can't say that absolutely, but I believe there are. There are for the kinds of pesticides that can be used in general.
As
But
they,
I would have to
yeah.
research that to be sure.
as they tell us in the Master Gardener program, what's on the label is the law. So any
Yes.
pesticide that you're using, you are required by law to follow the label. That includes
Yes.
anybody.
Anything else?
That's it for the moment.
All right. Let's move on then and talk about preventing the problems in the first place. What is promoted at the University of Minnesota is Integrated Pest Management, or IPM. It's a procedure to address a problem in the right way and really does focus more on environmentally friendly ways to work on a problem rather than being really aggressive. So we start with the changes to the physical garden and then work toward new elements. So we're going to take these common sense steps, which we did in looking at what this particular plant likes or doesn't, for instance. And then our idea is to really keep the plants healthy. We want to put them in a place that gives them the best chance of being healthy and living well. If they are healthy, they're better able to resist any kinds of problems that are coming along. And the example I always give is when you look at a plant label, you could, for instance, take your tomato plant and plant it under a pine tree, but it's not going to do very well there. Whereas if you put it in a sunny place, it is much more likely to be a healthy plant and do well. So sometimes you can play around a little bit with a plant, but be aware that it is more likely to have problems if it isn't in good conditions for its growth. Second, use good gardening practices. For instance, do keep your gardening tools clean and sanitized. That way you can't spread disease between one part of your garden or one plant and another. And we suggest that you sanitize your garden tools with 10 parts water to 1 part bleach, or some folks don't like to use bleach. And we cannot recommend any particular brands, but anything that is a disinfectant, a good disinfectant you can use, and then rinse those tools off. Then again, identify what the pests could be and physically change the garden if that will help, whether it's moving 2 plants away from each other. Maybe they're planted really close and not getting enough air around them, which can make things worse with the mildew, for instance. So you can look at, can I make any physical changes that might help this problem? And then as your last step, use control agents or sprays or chemicals as needed. If you really need them, that would be your last step. And before I go on, I'm just gonna, the reason that that using chemicals is your last step is that they can have side effects that we're not expecting. And so it could be that in getting rid of one pest, we are killing many other beneficial insects, for instance. So, or it could be detrimental to your pets. So you want to be very careful. And as Jean said, the label is the law. You need to read those labels very carefully and follow them to the letter, so that you can be safe. Your plants can have a good result, but you and your family and friends and other wildlife are safe. So the next thing here is to accept imperfection. And some folks really have a lot of trouble with this. We really like our gardens to be perfect, but a garden truly is never perfect unless you're constantly ripping things out. Plants wilt and leaves have holes, especially if you live around here and have those beetles coming. Sometimes flowers die, and sometimes your vegetables will look very weird. But that doesn't mean that they're not valuable, not okay. If it's not going to kill the plant, then consider doing a little trimming off of the leaves or the part that's not doing well, or removing it from your garden if you feel like you need to. But there's a lot of times that even spraying it with something is not really going to make a difference. So if you do think if it's an actual problem, then you may want to treat it. So to really prevent these problems in the areas of culture and sanitation, what we're trying to do is improve the risk or improve the health of plants that are at risk. And that way we reduce the risk of the pests themselves. So again, a healthy plant is going to be more resistant to any kind of problems. And then we want to choose the right plants. We talked about sunlight. You also want to look at how much moisture your plant gets. Have you had good luck growing it before, and why or why not? Is it something that needs protection, like up by a house? So look at all of those things. Again, be aware of what kind of pests are likely to go after a particular plant. Its aphids are almost inevitably on roses, and it goes on from there. Again, use good gardening practices. Keep your tools good and clean. If you can, do your gardening in the morning when it's cooler, and not in the heat of the day when your plants are under the most stress. Keep your garden clean. Try to remove dead things that have fallen down, etc. Now, I always have mixed feelings when I talk about this, because I also teach a class on pollinators. And when we talk about doing what's good for pollinators, for instance, you might hear us say exactly the opposite if you're in one of our plants or one of our classes. For instance, we often recommend keeping a little bit of twigs or extra mulch or whatever around the garden or in a particular place in your yard as kind of a refuge for the different pollinators. And so it is a balancing act, and just be aware of that. You want to keep clean, but maybe not too clean, or maybe you can move some things to another location where they're not bothering those particular plants. So we're in regard to choosing your plants wisely, you want to end up with nice, healthy plants and know how much sun and water they need and what commonly will go after them. And then once you plant them, check them regularly so that you catch the problems early. I have always liked the practice of going out in my garden just about every morning, unless it's pouring rain, and just walking around and seeing what's happening in general. And by doing that, you also get a head start on any problems that may be starting. And if you get a head start, sometimes you can take care of it before it gets out of control. I feel like I'm saying this a lot, but keeping your plants healthy is a very important thing. You want to improve their immune system, especially if they're a more tender plant. And again, plant in the right place, water it regularly, and if there's debris and particularly weeds, try to keep up with that, which I know gets old for a lot of people by this time of the year, and it's been a hard year to get out there, again, because of the heat. But the more you can do that, if you're weeding, then your other plants are not fighting for nutrients and water. And then we want to look at up the yellow section on the pyramid there, the physical, mechanical, and biological kinds of controls that we could use. Changing the environment physically to reduce the risk of pets or pests. And this is usually animals, not insects so much. You can use physical barriers and fences. We see one on the top there, an actual fence to try to keep the deer away and actually block their access. We can also use row covers. You see that down at the bottom, which it helps to keep insects away. So you can consider that. And then almost all the time we recommend using mulch to keep your weeds down and try to keep the microbial pests away, because when the rain falls, if it falls in the dirt and splashes up on your plants, any kind of microbial pests are going to splash right up there with the rain. Now this is another one that is, it depends on if you're trying to help the pollinators or keep the pests away, what your priority is and what kind of problems you're having. Safe habitat for a pest, if you remove it, you're going to be less likely to have them around. So here you see the bees like, particularly if it's kind of sandy, a bare area in your yard to be able to tunnel into. And if you get rid of all of that, they will be discouraged. The same thing is true with water. If you're providing water or if you're feeding birds, you can often have more of a problem with other pests. If you live in a place where you have overgrown areas, one way to keep the pests away is to mow them. But it's also good habitat for some of the pollinators to be safe. A lot of people now are, I won't say a lot, some people are growing bee lawns. which are walkable plants. They're pretty, but they're a little more wild looking than our ordinarily kind of manicured lawns. So you can mow that. You can keep your soil covered to keep the insects out, and you can remove the water if you feel that that's causing a problem. Then on the other side, you can invite beneficial predators. The benefits of these are that they do help control the pests, and sometimes flowers can be beneficial in keeping, kind of repelling pests. You can provide birdhouses and other safe habitat and water, for instance, a bird bath. And again, that's a balancing act. Our last option is chemical options, and the university doesn't say avoid them altogether. They simply say use them only if you really need to. And if you do use certified pesticides, and not grandma's formula for a homemade one, that is not recommended. And use the right pesticide for the job. So you would want it to have as narrow an effect as possible, kind of focused on whatever plant you're having, or pest you are having problems with. So you can deal with that and not be keeping pollinators away. The benefits of the pesticides are they are tested and for effectiveness and safety. And again, be sure that you use it exactly according to the label. There are different types of pesticides. The first is herbicides. That's for plants. And it can either prevent a problem or cure a problem. But it may also kill desirable plants. So if you want to kill your dandelions, you may use an herbicide, but you want to be careful what it is if your dandelions are growing in the lawn, because you probably don't want to kill the lawn. Insecticides are, of course, for insects, and they too can prevent a problem or cure it. And they work by either being ingested by the insect or the insect making contact with that insecticide. And then the fungicides are preventative only. There is not anything you can put on, or a fungicide will not prevent or will not cure a fungus once you have it. So that's the bad news about those. Homemade pesticides, it's true, and some people recommend them as being more natural or lower cost, but as I said earlier, they're not recommended because they're not scientifically proven or tested. They may not be effective, and they could prolong the problem, and they can cause unexpected damage. So as master gardeners, we only recommend things that have been tested and scientifically proven. And that's why we do not recommend kind of your homemade pesticides. So that we've just been through kind of how to prevent those problems with integrated pest management. Do we have questions?
We've had quite a few questions. Is there a list I can refer to for safer choices of pesticide to protect our pollinators? And in the chat, we've included a resource from Michigan State University.
Great.
A very good resource there. We also had a question, what to use for tomato blight? and
Okay.
sent out a resource from the University of Minnesota. So check your chat if you're interested in those. What is the covering of row covers made out of? And would that work for squash bugs?
It's a mesh, and it depends on how dense the mesh is that you put there. I mean, sometimes it's almost like a fabric, but
a lot of really specific questions. I don't know how many you want to take right now, if you want to keep going with the talk and catch up with some more later.
sure, sounds good.
Okay.
Okay. So let's talk about how we treat these problems if we have them. Ironically, that's not my plant, but it looks an awful lot like one I have looked a few weeks ago. You can just give the plant additional care. Again, go through your steps and think about what's wrong. Does it need water or fertilizer? Does it need more protection? Is it root bound? Very often, be careful about the watering. If it's, you want to be sure that it really does need more water. And I say that because overwatering kills many more plants, especially house plants, than underwatering. So if you're not sure, you can stick your finger into that dirt in there down an inch or so and see how the soil feels. I would also lift out this plant and see how the roots look. If they're all circled around the plant, it may be root bound. It may need a little bit of room, a bigger pot, some fresh soil. So that is another good option. And then take a look at your watering practices. You want to fertilize all through this growing season now, but not in the winter, really. Mulch around the base of the plant, that will help keep moisture in. And then check if there is any damage or if you see any insects or anything on it. And do be aware that it's great to have drainage at the bottom, but you don't want your plant to be sitting in that water. So it's best to water it and then dump out whatever is in the saucer so that it's not just drying that up constantly and causing root rot. You may want to or need to relocate some of your plants. And this is really beneficial, of course, to give the plant more or less sunlight. I've seen a number of hosta this year that truly are sunburned. And whether that's just where they were planted this year or the amount of sun we have, it can help with whatever you have if it's in the wrong spot. It can give it better growing conditions. And again, a healthy plant is more resistant to problems. Again, be sure that you know the preferred conditions and get the soil ready at the new location, and then follow the recommended replanting times and steps. If you want to split a plant or move it, the best times are usually the opposite of when the plant blooms. So if it's a spring blooming plant, generally, if you have a choice, you would want to split or move that in the fall and vice versa. So do keep that in mind. And if you move it, then be sure you give it a nice sized spot for it to go into. Removal is a very good solution, particularly for the Japanese beetles. For any of these insects or those little microbial pests, you can just pick them right off and put them into soapy water so they can't get out, and they will die, and they won't reproduce. I don't recommend squishing the Japanese beetles because they stink if you do that. And then after doing this kind of work, you want to clean your garden tools and prevent the spreading. If you want to try this with your Japanese beetles, early morning, you can often just brush a bunch of them into your soapy water. Stay away from the traps that are sold still at some garden centers. They really serve only to attract more beetles to your area. So do stay away from those. My daughter has somehow managed to talk her 5-year-old into thinking that brushing those beetles off into soapy water is great fun every day. So you can always find a little kid and try that. It's also good to protect the other plants that are near the problem plant, so the problem doesn't spread, and it can help the survival of the other plants you have. You certainly don't want the whole garden ruined in that way. So you can use mulch, other kinds of barriers if you want, or relocate or respace the plants. Sometimes you just need to dispose of them with particularly abiotic problems and insect pests. Sometimes you just need to pull that plant out or dig it out. And if you have real good compost that gets real good and hot, you can put it in your home compost. But it's pretty hard to get home compost hot enough to kill everything that should be killed in there. So you can also take it to your county site that collects this stuff. They collect so much and then turn it into sterilized compost. So consider that. You also can bury plant material 6 to 10 inches deep if you wish, or burn it. We talked about the local yard waste program. Do be sure to disinfect, again, your garden tools and pots and in the spring and fall, if no other time, or spring or fall, so that you're not passing that along. And then if you have sufficient space, you can try rotating your plants in next year or the years after that. So you're not always planting the same thing in the same spot and attracting the same pests. If you don't have enough room, which many in the city do not, for some things, large pots are a reasonable alternative. I've had real good luck growing tomatoes, for instance, in large pots. So to recap a little bit, give your damaged plants a little TLC, move them if they need to be moved, and then care for your nearby plants. Use fences or barriers, or just get rid of the plant if you need to. Any questions? Okay, well, we are just about done, but I would like to show you a couple of garden resources, and then we can deal with more questions if they're still out there. The University of Minnesota Extension website is just an excellent resource. So much information. Master gardeners use it a lot ourselves to diagnose problems and see what's going on. And it's also a great place to see kind of what's going on in this area. What's the latest pest that's bothering everyone, and just get a little broader view. Master gardeners also have a website, and that's a good place to find out where we might be having diagnostic clinics or educational programs like this. Now with COVID, things have been different. We've been more online, but in typical years, we would also be at farmers markets and fairs, and also at the yard waste collection sites. We also have an Ask an Expert tool, and you will get with your handouts is a copy of this presentation. So you will get copies of all these links. This is a really cool tool where you can go online, and you can also call by phone and ask your question, give as much information as you can. Doing it online with an email is a great option because then you can send pictures as well. But we try to research it and get back to you within 48 hours with an answer. So let's move on from there. Come back here. You might notice in that slide, it says, "What's wrong with my plant?" And I really urge you to go take a look at this. You can see, for instance, that you could click on vegetables, and from there, click on tomatoes, and give a couple of symptoms, and you will get information about what the problem might be and what you might want to do about it. And it's pretty extensive and growing all the time. So really great resource. I hope you take a look at it. And that is it for the presentation, but we may have questions.
Sharon, we were able to answer most of the questions by sending links to university-associated information for most of the questions. We had everything from the best way to discourage ants from nesting at the roots of berry plants, to controlling cucumber beetles, to zucchini powdery mildew. So we had some great.
Wow. Sounds great. Well, I sure thank you all for coming, and hope this was helpful.
I'll repost the slides again if you can hold on a second. Somebody was asking for them.
Thank you, Kristen. And thank you, Sharon. That was great. Thank you, Jean, for helping with all of the questions. Kristen, for throwing links left and right in the chat. You were on it. I have a couple of questions that I get asked fairly frequently, and I would love to know what you all think about them. So one question I get commonly has to do with pollinators and thinking about, Sharon, you were saying early on about being careful and making wise selections in our plants, and thinking about pollinators, about plants that might have systemic insecticides in them or have been seed treated. Mm-hmm. And so if there are ways that folks can be on the lookout for what might or might not be safe, especially if they're looking to support and encourage pollinators, because the last thing anyone wants is to buy an insecticide treated plant for pollinators and then they have done the opposite of helping them.
Yeah. I think, Jean, you said you had a list from University of Michigan. Is that right? Of
yes,
kind of recommended resources. And really, if you do all these other things, you will find that you don't need to you don't need the chemicals as much. Particularly, I think it's interesting that some of the plants themselves deter the problems. So I can't give a blanket answer, but as little as possible in the chemical area is very, it really is beneficial. You'll really see the difference.
Absolutely. And I think now I don't think this is consistent, but I think in some garden center stores, you'll see on the actual plant tag that it might say, you know, neonicotinoid free or something like that, which is really important for bee health. They're very sensitive to neonicotinoids. So I know in some cases that is true, but I'm not sure if you know of other ways to be sure that the plants you're buying aren't already treated.
The advice that we really gave this spring, more because of the jumping worm problem, that the jumping worms were, nobody was real sure where they were, what to do with them. And really, the best we could do is say, be sure you're buying from a place you trust. That you can ask them and they'll tell you the truth about whatever they're giving you. And also be careful about, with that, we talked about, it's not a good year to be trading plants with your neighbors because we don't really know what's happening there. So I think things like that are helpful, and it's the reading label that you said. Reading the label, there's really no substitute, and even like when you get ready to store it for the winter, you want to be sure you're keeping track of that.
Excellent, thank you. I know we are at time, so I'm going to go ahead and launch our last poll. And if anyone does need to go ahead and leave, you'll also receive this via a link that will pop up after you leave. And then you should also receive it via email after the program ends tonight. But if anyone does want to stick around, has more questions, I have another question, Sharon, if you don't mind staying around with me. So you mentioned the jumping worms, which segues right into this one. A number of folks have been finding that they're also being transferred via mulch this year. So given that, do you have any suggestions on how to safely acquire mulch for gardens that you can have at least a pretty safe chance of it? I guess
unfortunately, again, it's the, it really, especially for this year, has been go somewhere that you trust and maybe start small and see. But the jumping worms were so new this year, and the little eggs were so tiny that it was hard to tell. So about all that we could tell people this year was go to a place you trust, maybe not the bargain stuff, but that can be hard too. Yeah, I wish I had an answer, but
that's okay.
A little bit like COVID, I guess we didn't know all the answers yet, so we could take our best guess.
Are there maybe alternatives to mulch that folks can consider, like maybe keeping leaf litter around from their own neighborhoods and yards or something like that?
You certainly can do that. And for that matter, for the most part, and none of my relatives will do this. They just think I'm a wacky woman, but and maybe I am. But the university now really says, mulch those leaves right into your lawn. It's good for the lawn. The same thing with the clippings. And if they're super long, if you just mow over them twice, and you can also use those for mulch in in your gardens. The grass clippings will have a lot of nitrogen. So I know many years ago when I was just getting started with gardening, I just put all kinds of grass clippings in, and my tomatoes were 6 feet tall with no actual tomatoes on them from all the nitrogen. But yeah, a leaf litter is good mulch, and it's also good to spread on in the fall, and it'll, incorporate in over the winter. So
Thank you so much. Those are the last questions I have.
Okay.
Jean, did anything else come through the chat that you saw? It looks like we got everything on my end.
I'm not seeing anything. Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and throw a few more links into the chat one more time. If folks are interested in the Bugs Outside the Box exhibit, as well as our upcoming events, we've got star parties coming up and all kinds of great things lined up. We are going to take a break from our Bugs Outside the Box workshops during August. It's a pretty busy month with back to school and all of that, but we'll come back in September with Dragon's Wind and learning about how we can support insects as they make their homes and prepare for the winter. Again, Sharon, Jean, Kristen, thank you so much for being here. And Megan, thank you for captioning this evening. We're so pleased to have you with us. Thank you to all of our participants, and I hope we see you around the museum soon. Have a great night, everyone.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.